Hello and welcome from the Washington Institute. I'm Rob Satloff, the Siegel Executive Director here at the Washington Institute. I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special event. We had an earthquake in America on Tuesday. We had not, as was expected by many people, a close nail-biting election, an election that whose results we may not have known for days. Instead, we had a clarifying moment here in American politics with the stunning electoral victory of Donald J. Trump, returning to the White House, only the second person in American history who will have non-consecutive White House administrations. How is this being viewed? Americans are still absorbing the shock of this substantial victory. But it is not too early for us to turn abroad and to hear from Middle Eastern voices about how this victory is being viewed across the Middle East and what Middle Easterners, leaders and peoples alike, hope to hear from the new president on the issues that matter most to them. And for that, we at the Institute are delighted that three of the region's most highly respected journalists are with us today to offer their views on these critical questions. I'm first going to turn to David Horowitz, who is the founding editor of the Times of Israel, a former editor of the Jerusalem Post and the Jerusalem Report, who's joining us from Israel. Then we will turn to Barshin Yananch, who is in Turkey. Barchin is currently an independent journalist. She was the former opinion editor of the Hurriyet Daily News. She's currently a columnist for T24, formerly an editor of CNN Turk. We're delighted that she's with us to offer the view from Turkey. And then from Abu Dhabi, I'm delighted that Nadim Koteich is with us. Nadim is the general manager of Sky News Arabia, a columnist for Sharq al-Awsat and one of the best known and most highly respected journalists in the Arab world. I'm delighted that all three of you are with us today. Before I begin, let me just say to our viewers, many of you know the drill. If you want to get into our conversation, if you want me to try to get your questions into our discussion today, please feel free to put your comments or questions in the Q&A function of the Zoom bar if you are joining us on that platform, or if you're joining us on another platform, please send me an email directly to rsatloff, that's RSATLOFF, at washingtoninstitute.org, and I will monitor those emails throughout our discussion. So I've asked our three panelists two questions. How are the election results being perceived in your countries at both the leadership and the popular levels? And second, what do your leaders hope and expect to see in a Trump administration approach to your countries or your regions' most important issues on the policy agenda? And so to begin our conversation, I'll turn to David Horowitz from the Times of Israel. David.
Thanks, Rob. Very good to be here. Very pleased to be on this panel, privileged to be on this panel, speaking to you from Jerusalem. So let's go with your first question. How are the results being perceived by leaders, the people? First of all, this is a country that would have voted for Trump over Harris by more than America did. I mean, far more. Pre-election polling, 66 to 17%, something of that order. I can't think of a more popular politician in Israel than the newly returning president of the United States. We should say this is quite a contrast to American Jews. I think there are various exit polls, but it seems to be clear that about 70% or more voted for Harris. So that's really quite a striking distinction. Why? Why are Israelis so pleased that Trump won this election? Because in his first term, he advanced numerous policies that are consensually supported in Israel. He moved the embassy, the US embassy, to Jerusalem and recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. He endorsed Israeli sovereignty at the Golan Heights, on the Golan Heights. He attempted, shall we say, a maximal economic pressure policy on Iran to try to, well, pressure the regime and put an end to the potential nuclear threat. He withdrew from the Obama-era nuclear deal. And of course, he brokered the Abraham Accords, this series of agreements with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, was meant to be completed with Sudan as well. All of those steps, I would say, were hugely appreciated by the Israeli mainstream, not wall to wall across the board, but very, very far across the mainstream, with the possible exception, I would say, of him withdrawing from the Iran Accord, where there is, I suppose, more debate in Israel as to whether that was a smart thing to do. In terms of the leadership, Netanyahu was delighted. He sees Trump as an ally. I think he thinks that he was the first world leader to, in writing, congratulate Trump on winning the election, although I understand there's some competition for that prime claim. The mainstream political opposition in Israel, I would say, is broadly happy. Some context on that. I mean, Joe Biden is seen in Israel as having been overall supportive of Israel in the past year or so, which has been a terrible year, possibly the worst year in modern Israeli history, I would say almost certainly, since Hamas's invasion on October the 7th last year. There's been some frustration, I would say, with the administration among Israelis, including over the allegation that Israel could somehow have defanged Hamas in Gaza, with fewer Gaza non-combatant casualties, a sense in Israel that Hamas turned Gaza into a terror state, and much of the international community hasn't quite understood what it was dealing with. But I think broadly, Biden was seen as an empathetic Zionist uncle. He came to Israel within days of October the 7th. He told the public that things would eventually get better. He connected to the public. Netanyahu is not good at empathy and is very divisive. So Biden was a comfort. But Harris, and this is relevant because of how attitudes on Trump have changed, I think she's seen in Israel as under pressure from parts of the Democratic Party that are hostile to Israel, inexperienced on foreign policy, unlikely to be as supportive as Trump or Biden on the need to tackle Iran, less scarier than Trump might be to the Iranians, less scary, and also perhaps less credible than Trump would be with the Saudis in any normalization process. So, you know, there's a recognition, shall we say, that Trump can be unpredictable, but Israel has seen him for a term, and the results, like I say, were widely appreciated, whereas Harris would have been an unknown. And then on to your second question, Rob, in terms of what Israel's leaders hope and expect to see from the Trump administration. First of all, a solid alliance. And that has been the case for a long time in Israeli-American relationships, although there have been arguments and disagreements. Broadly speaking, the alliance has been extremely solid, vital to Israel. A strategic approach to expediting the demise of the regime in Iran and/or curtailing the Iranian nuclear weapons program. On the far right, I would say, and why am I, putting that in the context of Israel's leaders? Because there are two far-right parties in Netanyahu's coalition. And there is a push to see a resumption of Israeli settlement in Gaza from where Israel withdrew in 2005. Netanyahu opposes this, but he has gone and will go to great lengths to keep his coalition together. In the course of our conversation this evening, at around 1 hour from now, or a little less, the firing of the defense minister will take effect. Netanyahu just fired his defense minister. It took 48 hours to come into force. It will come into force. And among the reasons that he fired his defense minister were coalition issues over the draft of ultra-Orthodox males, over the hostages in Gaza, and so on. Netanyahu has a very keen eye on the stability of his coalition. So far-right pressure for things in the Israeli government cannot be utterly discounted. There's also, we should stress, the start of a call to significantly expand Jewish settlements in the West Bank and assert sovereignty in the settlements and annex parts of the West Bank. Also relevant, given that this is somewhat close to what happened or was about to happen or what Netanyahu wanted to happen in 2020 when Trump was president, of course, and thought he had Trump's backing for expanding sovereignty to include the settlements, for annexing the Jordan Valley and so on. And there was a bit of a fiasco there. He was basically disabused by Jared Kushner of the notion that the administration was supportive But that's out there too among some of the Israeli leadership in terms of goals. And then maybe finally, and I'll end with this, the goal of expanding the Abraham Accords, most notably to include Saudi Arabia. That might sound contradictory, if you're not going to make dramatic progress on the Palestinian front. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Would you be able to expand those accords to include Saudi Arabia? Remember, when Trump was seeking re-election the first time and was beaten by Biden, he argued that deals with the Saudis and others were at hand, that there were nations lining up to normalize their relations with Israel. That didn't progress in the years of the Biden administration, hasn't progressed to date. There is a hope, certainly, from Netanyahu that Israel will be able to expand the circle of normalization agreements it has in this part of the world with the Saudis as the most important, of course. So I'm sure we'll come back to lots of these other issues, but I think that sort of sets the big picture.
All right, terrific. Thank you very much, David. So we're going to move from Israel to Turkey. Barchin, the floor is yours.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for the invitation. It's certainly a pleasure and a privilege. Well, let me start by saying that Trump's victory has been welcomed with mixed feelings in Turkey, which sort of reflects the polarization in Turkey as well. Polarization in the sense that there are pro-Erdogan and there are anti-Erdogan. So the country is divided on that line a little bit. So for the opposition and those in the civil society who are complaining about democratic backsliding, Trump's return to White House means democratic backsliding consolidating in Turkey, authoritarianism consolidating in Turkey. Now, to give you a perspective, I believe Mr. Trump has been talking about retribution, punishing his adversaries. Only a few days before the elections in the States, 4 mayors belonging to opposition have been deposed in Turkey and replaced by trustees. And the mayor of Istanbul, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu, is facing a political ban. And let's remember, he's the most serious challenger to Mr. To President. And therefore, when a superpower is ruled by a president who is not so much respectful of the rule of law, then people think that people under leaders in the other corners of the world will be less respectful for the rule of law. Having said that, even those who might not be very fond of Mr. Trump and what he represents, they are not shedding tears for the departure of the Democrats, and I think that reflects the displeasure of Democrats' approach to the wars, and especially the double standards, what is perceived to be a double standard in comparison with the war in Ukraine and Gaza. But I think it also reflects the fact that Mr. Trump's pledge that he doesn't want wars and that he would finish the wars in the world has been bought by part of the Turkish public. Now, when we look to the leadership, the Turkish President Erdogan obviously knows Mr. Trump, and they had a actually rocky relationship, during Mr. Trump's first term. However, they resemble, their style of governance resemble, both likes direct relations between leaders. But as I said, there has been many ups and downs during the first term. So there will be some cautious optimism, knowing that Mr. Trump's unpredictability can turn things pretty naughty. But I'm pretty sure Mr. Erdogan will tap and capitalize on his rapport with Trump. He would try to cap on his relationship. And in that respect, Ankara would probably be watching to what degree Mr. Trump will deliver on his pledge to end the wars, because at the end of the day, the wars we're talking about, they're in our region. The one in the north, the war in Ukraine, Russia, the one in the south, it's Gaza. So I expect Mr. Erdogan would be enthusiastically waiting for Mr. Trump to step in to negotiate between Putin and Zelensky. I'm sure he would offer his good offices, saying I'm in good terms with Zelensky, I'm in good terms with Putin. I could help the mediation. So that would be one aspect Erdogan and Ankara would be looking. And as you know, there is this S-400 issue. I mean, Turkey has purchased S-400, Russian-made S-400 anti-missile defense systems from Russia, which has been, poisoning relations between Washington and Ankara because sanctions was implemented on Turkey actually during Trump's term. So maybe some kind of a ceasefire, but independent of the ceasefire in Ukraine, maybe that could be getting out of the way during Trump's administration. In the Middle East, though, things are more complicated. As you might all know, Turkey is one of the harshest critique of Israel's approach to Gaza, and the views of Trump are well known. So that will be potentially the biggest headache between Ankara and Washington. Turkey has even cut all trade to Israel, although there are claims that trade is going on via the Palestinians. But more importantly than the war in Gaza, I think Turkey would definitely watch in great anxiety and concern how Trump will approach Israel's strategy on Iran. Now, let's remember that obviously Turkey and Iran are regional competitors, especially in Iraq and in Syria. They are not at the same page. They are at odds. So Israel weakening the regime in Iran and its proxies in the region in Iraq or Syria, it might, in the surface, look as to benefit Turkey. But Turkey has suffered so much from instability, from the wars in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, that a potential contention between Israel and Iran spilling over to an all-out war, unleashing disruptive forces, that's a nightmare scenario. So Turkey would prefer to manage the risks in its competition with Iran rather than watching the consequences of an all-out war with Iran. And in that respect, independent of to what degree there will be the contention will continue or stop or spiral into a war, Trump's approach to Iraq and Syria as well will be closely followed. And there I come to one of the most important issues that has been poisoning relations between Turkey and Washington, in addition to the general erosion in trust between the two, and that is US's support to the Kurdish forces in Syria, namely the YPG, which Turkey believes is the same thing as the outlaw terrorist organization, the PKK, which is also recognized as a terrorist organization by the US. And to my knowledge, US is not contesting that the YPG is not different than the PKK. So knowing that the withdrawal from the process, let's say, the process of withdrawal from Iraq and Syria has already started, at least on paper, during Biden administration. How Trump will approach to the withdrawal, US withdrawal from Iraq and Syria, its presence in this country, and in this respect, whether the support to YPG will continue or will cease somehow. All these will obviously have effects in Turkey's domestic issues as well, including the Kurdish issue. Therefore, that will also be, one of the main key points Turkey would be looking at would be Trump's attitude and approach to Syria, and how his attitude would be actually affected by Israel as well. Let me just stop here. Am I on time? Am I on the limit?
You're perfect.
Yeah, all
That's
right.
perfect. All right. So, Barchan, thank you very much. You added a whole set of new issues to the agenda. I appreciate that. Let me just remind viewers again, if you want to get into the conversation through the Q&A function of the Zoom bar, or an email directly to me at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org. Now, from Abu Dhabi, I'm going to turn now to Nadim. Nadim has obviously a bit more of a complicated mission than David or Barchin, because Nadim is he's from he's in the UAE, but he's also going to offer some even broader perspectives that go beyond just how the Emiratis are looking at the Trump victory. Nadim, the floor is yours. We're mute, Nadim. You're still mute. Press. Say something.
I got it. I got it.
There you go. Okay, you're on.
So thank you for this chance, Rob, to be among this distinguished group of people talking about the Middle East. I don't think I have much to add to what they said eloquently and comprehensively. You tasked me with the task of talking about the Middle East, and as you know better than anyone else, the Middle East isn't a single entity. It's actually a very complex region with varying perspectives, and each region, depends on where you stand, is reacting differently to the prospect of or to the fact that Trump has actually won the White House. So for the GCC countries, Trump's comeback is generally welcomed. As David said at the beginning, he would have won, he would have secured his elections in the Middle East or in the GCC earlier than Washington, to be honest. They welcome him, and this is generally perceived due to the that there is a divide in Washington between idealistic, value-driven foreign policy associated with Biden and the transactional, pragmatic approach associated with Trump. The fact is much more complicated. From the GCC's perspective, it's not simply about idealism versus pragmatism. It's about whether an administration is willing to listen, empathize, and understand the region's unique challenges, solutions, and nuances, which has been absent during the Biden 4 years, at least the first half or 2/3. Under Biden, many in the Middle East felt that the US pursued policies from a moral high ground perspective without engaging deeply with the regional perspectives. In contrast, Trump's approach as he governed between 2016 and 2020, his approach is seen as more accommodating to regional input. This is the major anxiety in the region. He came across as someone valuing local insights rather than imposing a one-size-fits-all foreign policy. Issues like Iran, Al-Houthi in Yemen, Hezbollah, Iraq, even the relationship to Israel, to the peace process, Palestine, all of these issues and regional stability, they reflect this dynamic. They want someone who's humble enough to listen to the region. Countries in the Middle East are looking for a US administration willing to learn from those directly affected by these challenges, rather than assuming it knows the region better than those who live in it, whether it's about political Islam, Iran, again, Hezbollah, or any other issue. The Middle East, particularly the GCC, has evolved into a multi-aligned region, and this is a very important aspect of the foreign policy and the DNA of the region. Countries are strategically balancing relationships with multiple global powers, optimizing security, economic interests, without overlying on a single ally. The days of the Cold War are behind us, way behind us. So Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and UAE maintain critical security partnerships with the US and economic, obviously, while cultivating robust economic ties with China and India and other type of relations with Russia. Russia's increasing influence in Syria, for example, in Sudan, in Libya and other areas, its diplomatic outreach make it an appealing partner for selective regional cooperation, particularly in the Middle East and states like UAE and Saudi Arabia. On key issues, these nations now adopt a a firm stance on Iran, and they would like that to be the stance of the administration. They'd like to be working with Washington on counterbalance, countering terrorism. But they want to do that without direct confrontation, as Barshin was hinting at that. The same anxieties of Turkey are shared by the GCC area. They don't want a blowback from Iran due to haphazard, premature, kind of cherry picking kind of strategy. They want a very comprehensive strategy on Iran that they have input into. War is the last thing they need in this region. The GCC countries as well seek a non-interference in their local governance and social structures. This is very important. Aligning with partners who respect their sovereignty without imposing ideological agendas is very high on their agenda. Furthermore, the region remains committed to enhancing security partnerships through strategic arms deals, military training, counterterrorism, technology transfers that improve defense capabilities and support broader regional stability. These are very important issues because, as you know, Rob, there were some incidents with the Biden administration that these countries felt abandoned somehow in terms of their direct security issues. If I want to add something, I would say that in an increasingly multi-aligned setup, the Middle East is asserting its independence and navigating global dynamics with a focus on self-reliance, stability, pragmatism. And they are hoping for an administration in Washington, given the DNA of Trump and his upcoming administration, able to understand these things, able to understand that they need Washington and India and China at the same time, and they can talk to Russia at the same time. This multi-aligned world seems to be a central theme in the foreign policy of the region. And the more Washington understands that and helps them to avoid being, trapped within a Cold War setup between China and Washington, or China or Washington and Moscow, is something very, very important to their stability, security, and their future forecast in terms of their well-being as a country or as a region.
All right, fascinating. Thank you. I think you've all three of you have set the table very nicely. There's lots of questions, though, that have emerged from all these various presentations, so we're going to dig deeper into it right now. So, what do we know about Donald Trump in the Middle East so far? We know he wants wars to end. We know that he wants Israel to achieve some sense of victory, but do it fast. David, when Israelis here win fast, how does that mesh with their current policy? And do you expect that indeed these wars or the conflicts in Lebanon and Gaza will be brought to some sort of conclusion by time President Trump takes office in the third week of January?
Okay, that's pretty difficult to predict, Rob. And first of all, we should be incredibly wary. Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm going to try and be a bit wary about predicting stuff. If there's anything that Israel and Israelis should have learned since October the 7th, 2023, is don't be getting carried away with your assessments and your predictions. And before we get to the meat of your question, we should bear in mind, in the context of your question, that we've got 2 months. So when you're talking about, an Israel that is in the middle of a multi-front war, I mean, it began with a Hamas invasion. I reserve the right to impress upon people, because to understand Israel, I have to. This was a terrible, there's been nothing like this in the history of modern Israel. This was the worst day for Jews anywhere in the world since the Holocaust. There were 1,200 people who were massacred, most of them civilians in their homes, 250 people taken hostage, 97 of them still in Gaza, many of them dead. The Hezbollah began rocketing Israel the next day. There are 60,000 Israelis who can't go back to their homes in the north at the moment. We have been attacked by the Houthis, militias in Syria, militias in Iraq. And behind all this, I mean, Hamas did not fully coordinate this with Iran as far as we can tell, but behind all this is Iran. And Iran is now threatening to attack Israel again for Israel's response to its 200 ballistic missiles fired at Israel on October the 1st. This is an incredibly fraught context in which we are living in Israel at the moment. So you've got the 2 months first, and I suppose in the Iran context, maybe the most significant question. What is Netanyahu going to try to do in the remaining 2 months of the Biden administration? Will he try? Last time when Israel hit back on October the 26th, there was a great deal of pressure from Biden. Don't target the nuclear facilities, don't target their energy facilities. I'm not sure that there was any thought of targeting nuclear facilities last time. I'm not at all sure that there wasn't thought about targeting energy facilities. Israel really didn't do that, but did some things that would make it easier, I suppose, and spoke about it. I mean, the outgoing defense minister, Gallant, said, we did some stuff that will make it easier when we attack again. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but that's broadly what he said. So will Netanyahu try to step up if Iran hits again? And what would Biden signify that he's prepared for Israel to do, and how much will Netanyahu heed him? These are all, pretty important, urgent questions. And then, as you say, we come to the era of Trump 2 months from now, and that phrase that we've all mentioned now, I think, about not wanting to start wars, wanting to stop them, that he put into his victory speech there. So what does that mean in terms of Iran? And add to that, of course, that his incoming vice president, J.D. Vance, said Israeli and American interests will not always overlap, and it is most certainly not in our interest to have a war with Iran. Again, that's a paraphrase, but that's the thrust of what he was saying. I am certain that in terms of unfinished business, both Netanyahu and Trump would say that Iran is unfinished business. So how do you go about doing that? Maybe Trump will want to rely again on economic pressure. This is a vulnerable regime. I don't know how vulnerable to domestic protest, but it is not sitting pretty economically by any stretch. And there'll be maybe people on this panel who are more expert. And I would be interested to get a sense of how Nadim, for example, gauges the level of opposition to the regime in Iran from within. But that is unfinished business, and it will be very interesting to see how it's solved. In Lebanon, again, I'm very wary of predicting. It is said sometimes that there is a potential for a deal, a diplomatic arrangement that also then extends to Gaza and enables the release of the hostages. That's a mindset that our soon-to-be ex-defense minister, Yoav Gallant, represented. That's certainly not the mindset that is clearly represented by Netanyahu. And I don't know where Trump will stand on that, how much he will try to press Netanyahu, and so on. And then just a little word going a little further than your actual question asked, but in terms of settling conflicts, I think there's an assumption that Trump will be there'll be less pressure on Netanyahu as regards the Palestinians. And we may come back to this again, but I would just remind us that Trump's position on the Palestinians is not as unnuanced as some people might believe. He made his first trip to Israel. His first foreign policy trip was to Israel in 2017, but he also went to Bethlehem. He met with Mahmoud Abbas. He came back from that meeting, and in his last speech in Israel, he said, I think the Palestinians want peace. I think they're ready for peace. I know you don't believe that, but I know these kinds of things, right? He said in a pretty early interview in his first weeks in office, he doesn't think the settlements are good for peace. His plan did not meet Palestinian expectations. I'm putting it mildly, but it was not a plan that ultimately worked out well for Netanyahu. So it just bring those elements of nuance into this stage of the conversation.
All right, thank you, David. Nadim, I'm going to turn to you about the Iran aspect of this. You heard David repeat the words of J.D. Vance about America. We have no interest in a war with Iran. People, governments in your part of the world certainly have experience. It was under the Trump administration that Iran attacked an abcake and there was, shall we say, not everyone was delighted with the swift and overpowering American response to the Iranian attack on Saudi Arabia, to put it mildly. So when leaders look at the Iran challenge, I know you mentioned a moment ago about wanting a sort of a magical solution, deal with Iran, but don't create regional uncertainty that that can blow back against us. What do they actually see and hear from the Trump administration, and what do they really expect?
Well, the legendary Lebanese journalist Michel Abu Jawdi used to say, be pessimistic and your analysis is more likely to hit the mark than miss. So when you talk about the Middle East, it's always healthier to have a pessimistic outlook on the events. As you know, Rob, it takes two to tango. So if Donald Trump doesn't want war with Iran, and I believe him, and what I hear from the leaders in the region, that they definitely don't want war for on their side as well. It's up to Iran, actually, if they want or they don't want that war. We have two sides over the past 48 hours. One coming from Khamenei himself, when he said, I think today or yesterday, that the resistance in Iraq, Lebanon, and Palestine will continue and will prevail. And that was said after Nadim Qasim, the new Secretary General of Hezbollah, said something to the same effect. So basically, what we are getting from Iran on one side is Khamenei saying that the war will continue and that we will win. On the other side, Zarif just tweeted half an hour ago saying that, like, it was kind of an olive branch somehow, saying that making a contrast, surprisingly enough, between Trump and the potential of peace with him, as opposed to the warmongering Biden administration. I mean, probably he forgot that Trump is the guy who killed Qasem Soleimani. So I really can't, I'm unable to make sense of that. But let's I mean, look at the equilibrium, the balance at this point. Trump has more room to maneuver with Iran as the regime faces deep economic struggles, growing domestic unrest. We've seen that lady who undressed in the street, and if you take this as an indication or a benchmark, I think Iran is in 2025 close to another unrest. You know, there has been unrest in Iran every 2 years to 3 years and a half. Each 3 years there is a new unrest. So you have economic struggles, growing domestic unrest, weakened regional influence after the proxies of Iran took the hit, mainly Hezbollah and Hamas. They took a major hit. The missiles project of Iran was rendered ineffective after 2 strikes. The aerial defense inside Iran was a joke, as was manifested by the Israeli attack on Iran. So Iran kind of is losing the defense lines one after the other, and its regime is very much vulnerable in that sense. All of this is a leverage in the hands of Donald Trump. So, and with the aging Iranian leadership and the internal divisions, Trump may sense an opportunity for negotiations with Iran. Let's not forget that Trump is, he would like to put his name on a big deal that he can sell as bigger and better for the Americans than what Biden achieved or could have achieved. So this is very central to Trump's mindset. And we've seen him during this campaign, even after, for example, there was reports about the Iranians trying to kill him. Even after that, he mentioned the possibility and probability of a deal. Iran itself, given its weakened economic conditions, leadership uncertainty, diminished regional influence, Iran itself might be more open to negotiations If we just look at the fact that Pezeshkian is there saying what he's saying, Zarif is saying what he's saying, there is a probability for that. Okay, it will proceed carefully. It will aim to gain economic relief without conceding too much strategically, but there is room for that. I can see that. But again, it's tango, and it takes two to tango, and it's not enough that Iran, Washington, and the GCC and others don't want war. Israel obviously wants war. If I was in Bibi's shoes, I would say that the momentum I have now, I will milk it till the end. And if you are sitting in Khamenei's shoes, you would think that this is the only way to hijack the other trajectory of the region, going into the more Abraham Accords, more alignment, more I2U2 arrangements. So the probabilities are there for both scenarios, and the jury is still out.
So before I go to Barchin, David, just a quick reaction to the notion, or how do you think Israeli leaders would react to the idea that Donald Trump might want to negotiate with Iran and try to do a better Iran deal, improve upon the previous one? Would this be a welcome development?
That's a good question. I appreciate that you gave me the chance to speak here, especially as Nadim said, definitively Israel wants war. I wouldn't say that. I'm not saying that you're flat wrong, Nadim. I think the way I would put it is that Israel wants to see the demise of this regime. It takes it very seriously. Iran is bent on eliminating Israel. That's why it built up Hezbollah. It was very supportive of Hamas. It's behind lots of the other bad things that are being fired at and done to Israel. One way or another, it wants this regime. It wants to see the back of this regime. By the way, the Israeli leadership and much of the public would frame that as well as being in the profound interest of Iranians. This is a rapacious, ideological, territorial regime that's repressive to its own people. I don't know, Rob. Is it conceivable that Trump would try to renegotiate some kind of deal? If that were the case, I think it would not go down well in Israel. Anything that sustains this regime in power, rather than the opposite, would not go down well in Israel.
Okay, thank you. Barchin, let me turn to you. You made some very interesting comments about some tensions. On the one hand, Erdogan eager to work with Trump on resolving the Ukraine crisis, and might be a junior partner in helping him achieve that goal, but yet Erdogan being on the front line of criticism of Israel, and which is in the exact opposite position of where Trump has called for Israel to win as fast as it can. How do you think Erdogan is going to thread this needle, and do you think that he will end up more successful in negotiating a relationship with Trump in the second Trump administration than he ended up in the first one?
Well, certainly, because at the end of the day, he has the experience a little bit of working with Trump. But the main difference with the first time is that when Erdogan was striking a deal with Trump on the telephone or on his face-to-face conversations, when they would decide on something, that wouldn't be implemented by the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy would be stopping it. An example would be at one stage, Turkey convinced Trump to withdraw US forces from Syria. And he said, okay, if you're going to, fight the terrorists there, I'm pulling them out. But afterwards, CENTCOM has objected it. So although maybe the numbers diminished, the decision was not fully implemented. Now, this time, however, I guess, and I'm not well positioned to say it, but I guess he is coming with more control he's coming with a team, and probably, he will know he's around. So when he will take a decision, probably somebody would be there to follow it up. So there will be some kind of a decision. On the Ukrainian front, I think there is a room for more, positive development, because at the end of the day, Erdogan can use, as I said, his relationship, his dialogue with Ukraine and Russia to facilitate the process. And in addition, I think Turkey can even play an incremental role in the implementation of the ceasefire or whatever peace resolution, because Ukraine is asking for security guarantees, for instance, and Turkey could play a role in providing or in taking, part in some kind of a security mechanism for Ukraine. But the Middle East would be quite difficult. The problem with the Biden administration is that Turkey, I think, feels marginalized. Turkey feels that it is not being listened. I don't know how many times Blinken came to the region. And I, as a journalist, 20 years ago or something like that, if there was some crisis like that, we would have definitely see an American foreign minister, dropping by Ankara or Istanbul before moving to Middle East. Whereas he just came a few times, and the one time he came, it wasn't about the Middle East. It was about to solve the Turkey's, veto of Israel, of Finland and Sweden NATO membership. So I think part of Turkey's sort of reactionary attitude stems from feeling of being sidelined and marginalized. So if Trump were to listen a little bit, if there would be a dialogue, then I think Turkey would kind of endorse a more moderate attitude, but at least in the beginning, I guess Turkey would, especially Erdogan will endorse a more, a controlled rhetoric, perhaps less aggressive against Israel.
And just to be clear, do you expect Erdogan to again make the offer to early on to sort of take over security in Syria and invite Trump to withdraw American troops from Syria?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because anyway, I think there's already some kind of a roadmap, right? That has been agreed with Baghdad, between Baghdad and Washington. Although it's a bit vague, if you ask me, this roadmap. Having said that, it's not just simply seeing U.S. soldiers go. It's about what they will leave behind, what kind of a configuration there will be, what will happen to the YPG, because at the end of the day, there's this feeling. I will underline this, is whether I believe it or not. The perception of Turkey is that the reason why U.S. is providing military support to YPG is less to do about fighting the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant or ISIS, but more about sort of something against Turkey. It is perceived like that. For instance, when David is talking about Israel wanting to see the demise of the Iranian regime, now that for Turkey, and as I said, Turkey is not so big fond of the regime in Tehran. But if there is this the demise of the regime, what comes next for Turkey's perception, which is always based on what the Kurds would do. This would mean division of Iran, and there will be Kurds trying to become independent. They might join the Kurds in Iraq, and then they might be joining by the PKK and the Syria, and then you will have this nightmare scenario for the security, especially security apparatus in Turkey. So when actually President Erdogan has said, after Lebanon, Israel has set eyes on our soil, actually, I don't think he really meant that Israel will be directly attacking Israel, but he meant that by seeking the toppling of the regime in Tehran, Israel might be seeking the division of Iran, which might end up towards going towards a Kurdish state, etc., etc.
Right.
That's perception.
All right, thank you, Nadim. Let me ask you this: in recent weeks, we saw the ruler of the United Arab Emirates here in Washington, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, meeting President Biden, created a new level of strategic partnership between the two countries. Lots of talk about the potential upgrading of the U.S.-Saudi strategic relationship, preferably in the context of an agreement with Israel. But there's even some who say that different aspects of this could be done outside an agreement with Israel. So we see Gulf leaders eager for deepening strategic ties with the United States. Do you see this sort of effort taking on more steam in a Trump administration? Is it? I mean, in some sense, there's a certain irony that an administration in Washington, whose rhetoric at least is, we don't want to get involved in all these problems around the world, but yet there are governments who are eager to deepen their strategic partnerships. Do you think that process is going to continue with the Trump administration?
Absolutely, and to take your last sentence, Rob, I don't think that they are inviting Washington to be involved in their problems. If you look at the DNA of the visit of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed to Washington, it was focused on AI, quantum computing, biotechnology, chip making. The meeting with President Biden was 75% focused on these issues, not on other issues. That's the briefing of the meeting, the readout of the meeting tells you a lot about the priorities of Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed in terms of how he sees the relationship with Washington. But I will go back to what I said about the multi-aligned world or a strategy that is being trailblazed by UAE first and foremost. I think the Microsoft G42, which is the largest AI company in UAE, I think it's like $1.5 to $2 billion. This agreement is strategic in the sense that UAE has, and that there was a big problem between Washington and Abu Dhabi about Huawei and the G5 and the F-35, and that the Chinese technology might be a backdoor into American technology. There was this big debate in the past 4 years. What UAE did is that it sealed a technological alliance with Washington. Anything that has to do with chips, biotechnology, quantum computing, AI development, robotics, it's Washington. It's no one else. But Washington has to understand that UAE and Abu Dhabi has a very niche relationship with China and India on trade basis with 8% annual growth. That is the backbone of the well-being of the country. They will not compromise that. That's the multi-aligned world we're talking about. If you look at this visit to Washington, prior to that visit, Abu Dhabi received President Putin whom I met 2 weeks ago in Moscow. They received him despite of the persona non grata status that Washington is trying to cast on Vladimir Putin. They received him, and they showcased the ability to be in good relationship with Washington and Moscow at the same time, with Washington and Beijing at the same time. So I believe that they are not inviting Washington to be part of their problems. They are betting that Washington will understand that the Middle East problems are better solved with a huge grain of local perspective on the definition of the problem and the definition of the solution, whether that Iran, Palestine, or other crises in the region. I think there is a big chance with Trump, given that his administration might be kind of, isolationist in a sense, in a Trumpian sense, more nationalistic, as you would expect. I think there is a chance for a better understanding, and the fact that the Democratic Party has been defeated, with such a humiliating defeat. I think we're looking at. I mean, I know that's too early, but we're looking at 2 administrations at least ahead of us that are Republican, and I think this is a good thing for the region and for Washington.
All right. Well, we're gonna come back to your prognostication in 4 years and see whether or not you have a future in the crystal ball business, Nadim. David, I want to ask you about one aspect of where your national security establishment might be on the following. One of the most significant developments in the Biden administration was not just Israel's deeper integration into central command in a military sense, but the fact that we have seen for the first time very visible American military participation in the active defense and security of Israel. Whether it's April 14th and the participation of Central Command in in organizing the effort to counter the Iranian attack, or what we saw again last month, active, visible American participation in the defense of Israel. This is a new development in the evolution of the U.S.-Israeli security relationship. Is there any hesitation or any anxiety that maybe a Trump administration might not want to be as deeply involved in this sort of activity as given the president's preference to stay out of military confrontations?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, it's not unprecedented by any means, the partnership and the reliance on the relationship with the United States. It's deepened. Israel has not asked its allies to have their troops risk their lives for this country, although there is a very small contingent of American forces in Israel now operating some of the missile defense equipment. The fresh development, I suppose, is the degree to which there was not just American involvement and British and French, but regional involvement, including active involvement of Israeli peace partners in, especially, I think, the April attack, when there were hundreds of drones as well as cruise and ballistic missiles. The more recent attack was 200 ballistic missiles. It was a slightly different nature, but again, so American involvement, regional cooperation, and by definition, simply the way the American military is set up in this region now, Israel does have it has defensive partnerships with people in this region, with countries in this region, with which it does not have formal normalization processes, because they're all part of this shared defense umbrella led by the United States. I don't think there is concern in Israel, and I might be wrong about this, that Trump would be so isolationist and so conflict averse as to leave Israel unable to defend itself against primarily a regime that is openly seeking its destruction. I don't think so. I'll come back to the issue of the deal. When I say, if Trump was starting to do a deal with Iran, I'm not talking about a deal under which Iran takes apart under UN supervision or other more effective supervision its nuclear program, including all the dual use facilities. If Trump could engineer a deal where the regime no longer can pose a potential nuclear threat to Israel, well, wouldn't that be some deal? That's not the deal that he walked away from. So I don't think there's a concern that for all, and there was another line in his victory speech about prioritizing, I mean, this again is a paraphrase, but concentrating on domestic priorities first. That was kind of the effect of something that he was saying there. For all of that domestic prioritization and for all the potential isolationist mindset, I don't think there's a feeling in Israel that basically that Trump would hang Israel out to dry in the face of this terrible crisis, this multi-front attack. And I just want to sneak in one more thing here because I'm not sure we'd get to it, and forgive me. One of the things that is not really the ambit of this webinar, but I think is still very important. I want to make it clear. We're in a panel here in which I think people are very savvy and very worldly. I'm sure all the listeners are as well. I want to add in there that there's a tremendous sense in Israel of misrepresentation and misreporting of what has been playing out here for the last year and a bit. Israel had left Gaza. It was attacked from Gaza. Israel, feels that the nature of this conflict is being widely misreported, including by some of the best resourced news organizations in the world, widely misunderstood. And by the way, not only that, you also have this incredible surge of what might be called anti-Israeli protest, which is actually an effort from the day after October the 7th to turn Israel into some kind of pariah state that does not have the right to American military support to defend itself. And this astonishing spread of anti-Semitism, when your only focus is the terrible things that Israel is ostensibly doing, and never mind anything else in the world, when you're holding up signs that say from the river to the sea, even if you claim not to understand what they mean, this is support of the destruction of Israel, and that's anti-Semitic, not just anti-Zionist. So I just wanted to grab that 2 minutes to stress that context, which colors all the other things that we've been talking about.
All right, thank you, David. Nadim?
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay. David, I hear you clear and loud, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. And probably you don't know me, but Rob knows that how much of a peace enthusiast I am in the region. I wrote about that. I took very, very, very rough takes on that cost me a lot, and Rob probably would brief you on that later on. But having that said, means and ends should align. I totally understand that the Israelis cannot have peace unless they feel secure. But to feel secure, they are doing things that will make peace impossible. This is the catch-22 that we are, and I wrote about that in the Wall Street Journal. So, as means and ends should align. I mean, if as a liberal in the Arab regional sense, not in the American sense, as a liberal, I cannot but see the barbaric nature of October 7th. Equivocally, no buts, no ifs, nothing. However, if you look at the reaction, if you look at blowing up villages in Lebanon the way they are blown up now, the level of destruction, it's not keeping or preserving any credible space for people like me to come out and say peace is possible and peace is, I will never give up on that. But it will become practically impossible for my voice to be heard in Arab communities. I'm astonished that the Abrahamic Accords survived this stress test of October 7 and the aftermath of that. And I'm so proud that it did, given the resilience and the wisdom of the UAE leadership, and to be honest, how small the country is, and that this can be controlled in so many ways. But this is not the vibe in the region. This is not the vibe in Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Salman would go to the would join the Abrahamic Accords, or have his own version of the Abrahamic Accords any moment. But he knows that Palestine means to his people more than it means to him personally, and his people mean to him. So it's a very delicate and complicated relationship. I don't think that the way this war is being waged as a friend to Israel is something that we can be proud of, is something that we can defend, is something that we can uphold as an example of how wars should be fought. And I think I have many Israeli friends who share me this view, who are not fanatic liberals who see or self-hating people. I'm talking about reasonable people who cannot make sense of what is happening. So having that said, I totally sympathize by how much Israel is misunderstood in the region and globally even, and how it is easy. It's safer to walk in New York with a kafia these days, not with a kippah. This is a fact. This is reality, and I don't approve of that. However, we have to look inside at what is being done today. It is destroying the prospects of any possible peace in the future.
Shall I jump in as well?
Give me 1 second to come back to that, if you don't mind.
This is a terrific discussion. It's not today's discussion. So we're going to come back to this discussion with all three of you on it another time. I do have a couple of more questions that I want to get in just on this discussion, if it's all right, namely how we can look forward to the next couple of months and the start of the Trump administration. But I do want to ask this. There are 10 weeks between now and the inauguration of our new president. Joe Biden is an unleashed lame duck, in the sense that he's not handing over whatever he's handing over on January 20th is not to his own successor. It's to the other team. He is a free man for the next 10 weeks to do more or less as he sees fit. In our system, he is president with the full powers of the office until the inauguration of his successor. Are there things that you look to Joe Biden to do in the next 10 weeks that could be helpful to advance the interests where you sit? Let's focus on that for just a minute. Barchin, the next 10 weeks, Joe Biden still is president.
Oh, in terms of Turkish-US relations, the expectations are so low, the relations were very, very icy, so I'm not expecting the Turkish side to push for any issue. Actually, as I said, after Turkey withdrew its veto from Finland and Sweden's NATO membership, then talks had started for the purchase of F-16s from the US. Unless there might be some itsy-bitsy detail about it, they will be pushing for that agenda. But in terms of, the Middle East, etc., I think Turkey, the current administration doesn't have much of an expectation, because there's already not much of a dialogue, especially in Gaza, especially the fact that, the Biden administration has been very indifferent to what Turkey thinks. So I think they would be anxiously waiting for these 10 weeks to, finish as quick as possible without a major, though. But let me just say that in case Israel were to use this opportunity, this 10 weeks, to, give a major blow to Iran, in that case, obviously the Turks would go to Washington and say, whatever is necessary to say, stop Israel, or make sure Israel doesn't go too much, etc., etc. And according to the fallouts of a possible big spiraling out escalation, then obviously Turkey would very much like to be very much in contact with Washington. But this is a scenario whereby if Israel were a very drastic action against Israel. Other than that, I'm not expecting much to pursue as an agenda.
David, 10 weeks left of the Biden administration. Expectations, hopes?
I'm going to try and answer you and also sneak in a bit of a response to Nadim, forgive me. But in the spirit of what you're asking as well, I don't think they're going to do it, but I think what's crucial, and it's what's crucial to what Nadim and I, and I'm sure good people everywhere want to happen, which is that fewer lives are lost, that evil people who do not sanctify life are marginalized and prevented from causing harm. If you want to restore confidence in a potential process of coexistence, then push reform of the Palestinian Authority seriously. Netanyahu does not want a Palestinian Authority role in Gaza. It's hard to see what a day after in Gaza looks like. But if the PA was not the PA that it is today, and remember that's dominated by a Fatah faction that eulogized Yahya Sinwar as a martyr and a great national leader, I mean, what hope can Israelis have that they have a partner when that's what the relative moderate people on the other side are saying and doing? Start efforts on education. The only way you're going to change things in the long term in this part of the world is if you educate people to tolerance and mutual respect, and the fact that there are differing narratives and there has to be respect for differing narratives and so on. And just the last thing that I want to say, Nadim, I'm sure you're incredibly well informed, but I suspect that nobody really understands quite how Hamas has fought in Gaza and the extent to which it has taken over Gaza and the extent to which Hezbollah is everywhere in southern Lebanon, where the missiles are stored in civilians' attics and so on. This was not a war that Israel sought. It didn't want to believe that it was going to be attacked from Gaza. It had left Gaza, and what unfolded in Gaza and in southern Lebanon is terrorist armies in civilian areas, the like of which the world has never seen. That is not to say that everything that Israel has done is perfect. It's to try and give a greater sense of what Israel has been grappling.
And just to thank you for that, David. Just to press you on this, the Iranians are threatening to do another round of attack on Israel. Do you expect the Biden administration to be, shall we say, less restrictive in its advice to how Israel might retaliate the next time around?
I kind of think so, because Israel heeded its requests last time. I do not think that the administration would want to imply that it was giving Israel some kind of free range, including nuclear facilities, but on energy targets, for example, it's possible. And I'll just say one other thing about the degree to which Iran's defenses are degraded. I mean, their long-range defenses, yes, and Nadim, you mentioned this. That's not the same as having the capacity immediately over a target buried deep underground. And I think, obviously, Israel doing that as a last resort without America, I don't think that is Israel. That is something that Israel is about to do. A resort to that kind of force against Iran would really be a sense of last resort when, to use the words of a former Mossad chief, Meir Dagan, if and when Israel felt that the guillotine of an Iranian nuclear weapon was truly at its throat.
Okay, thank you very much. And Nadim, 10 weeks left. Is there time for the Biden administration to finish any of its grand plans in the Gulf? Is there time and desire, for example, for the Biden administration to actually negotiate the U.S.-Saudi defense treaty and bring this to fruition?
For a better use of time, the short answer is no. This is a very weak administration with almost zero leverage on any of the complicated issues that it is trying to tackle. I don't think this is the case, and I think anyone in the Middle East would wait for the new administration to build leverage with the new administration. That's the fact of things. To David, I would say it's not only about that. I mean, educated or not educated about this. I'm Lebanese originally, from the south, from Ainata. My village is in Rubbles now. due to this war, and I hold Hezbollah primarily responsible for that. I mean, my country was liberated in 2000, and the natural course of things is for Hezbollah to become a political party and enjoy the fruits of what they achieved in 2000. They chose, instead of redefining themselves as a military, as a political party, they redefined their goals, moving from national liberation, to being part of the regional Iranian expansionist project. That's ABC for me in the region. However, that does not absolve Israel from the responsibility to maintain the basis of peace that are prerequisite for someone like me to be able to talk to the public opinion, to be able to preach for coexistence, which I believe in, and to the deep of my bone marrows. There is no other way out of that. Neither Israel nor the Palestinians will evaporate in this region. So this is a fact that we have to come to terms with and work towards. And I think this war, I'm not a military expert. I cannot tell you how wars should be fought. What I can tell you is that my family, who are peace-oriented as well, they cannot absorb these images of whole villages being blown up by the Israelis for no matter the reason is. I mean, this is something that no one can swallow, and this is not the Israel anyone would like to live with. And I would say that many Israelis would agree with me on that. I mean, you stand for more than that. Israel stands for more than that. It stands for Tel Aviv, not for Tel Aviv as it is right now. There's so much to learn from. There's so much to copy. But there are things that we need to be honest about in order to be able to live together.
Yeah, but Tel Aviv is being blown up by the missiles in those very villages, Nadim. You have no argument with me.
I agree.
I have no argument with you about coexistence. I have no argument with you about respecting other people's narratives. The reality is the reality that we are facing.
Yeah,
All right.
Anyway,
Nadim, David, Barshin, I'm going to thank you all very much for this, for your remarks, and for what is actually quite a constructive back and forth between the two of you, since I know you both quite well, and I know that your strategic objectives are aligned on where you want, with the outcome that you're looking for. All three of you, actually. And so I want to thank you all very much, David Horowitz, Barshin Yananch, and Nadim Koteich, for helping offer the views from the Middle East to what has happened here in America, the political earthquake of the broad and decisive victory that Donald Trump enjoyed on our presidential election just 2 days ago. Thank you for joining us here at the Washington.